Development of the ventricles. Development of the ventricles start by formation of common bulboventricular chamber. Earlier in the development, we explained before that the bulbous cordis lies on the right side, and on its left side is the common primitive ventricle, with a deep sulcus in between. Gradually, this deep sulcus is obliterated, and the bulbous cordis migrate and move to the left side, so that the bulbous cordis becomes in front of the common primitive ventricle. Then the proximal part of the bulbous cordis is absorbed into the common primitive ventricle to form a common chamber called bulboventricular chamber. We want to divide this chamber to left side, left ventricle, and right side, right ventricle. How to divide the common bulboventricular chamber? By formation of interventricular septum. We know from anatomy that the interventricular septum is two parts: muscular part and membranous part. First of all, the muscular part start to be formed by proliferation of myoblasts. This is the common bulboventricular chamber. The myoblasts in the floor of the common bulboventricular chamber proliferate to produce a crescentic ridge, similar to the septum primum and similar to the septum secundum. It is crescentic in shape, with free crescentic cranial edge, because this septum develops from below. Therefore, its ridge, which is seen in this drawing as upper ridge, it is towards the head and neck, which is cephalic or cranial. It has a free crescentic cranial or cephalic edge, and it has two horns, dorsal horn and ventral horn, and this ridge grow cephalic toward the septum intermedium. Now there is a foramen between the right and the left halves of the ventricle. This foramen is called interventricular septum, interventricular foramen. Therefore, the muscular part of interventricular septum develops from the floor of the common bulboventricular chamber by proliferation of myoblasts. Proliferation of myoblasts from the floor of this common chamber cranially to form the crescentic ridge, which forms the muscular part of interventricular septum. And there is opening here called interventricular foramen. Sure, we want to close this foramen. We close this foramen by formation of the membranous part of interventricular septum. In the 7th week, mesenchymal proliferation from the three structures surrounding the interventricular foramen will form the membranous part of interventricular septum and close this foramen. What are the three structures which proliferate and grow to close the interventricular foramen and form the membranous part of interventricular foramen? First of all, the first structure just above this foramen is septum intermedium. And to the right side and the left side of the foramen, these two ridges, which are called right and left bulbar ridge. What are the right and left bulbar ridge? These are two ridges grow in the bulbous cordis from distal to proximal towards the ventricle. This ridge is called the left bulbar ridge or cushion, and this is the right bulbar ridge or cushion, and grows toward the interventricular foramen. This is another view. We open the right ventricle and we look to the interventricular septum. This crescentic part is the muscular part. This is the muscular part of interventricular septum. And this is the membranous part formed by proliferation from the middle, from septum intermedium, and from the two sides, left and right bulbar ridge. Fusion of these three parts will form the membranous part of interventricular septum. After closure of the interventricular septum, the middle part of bulbous cordis, which is called conus cordis, is also absorbed into both ventricles. How? The middle part of the bulbous cordis, which is called the conus cordis, is absorbed into the two ventricles to form the outflow of both ventricles. This is the opened right ventricle, and this is the outflow, a smooth conical part. Therefore, it's called, this part is called the conus cordis. And this part in the right ventricle is called infundibulum of the pulmonary trunk. Therefore, absorption of the mid portion of bulbous cordis, which is called the conus cordis, into the right ventricle forms this conical shaped, funnel shaped structure, which is called infundibulum of the pulmonary trunk. Absorption of the mid part of the bulbous cordis into the left ventricle will produce the outflow of the left ventricle, which is this smooth part, which is called the vestibule of the ascending aorta. Vestibule of the ascending aorta. What is the source, finally, of the ventricles? Two sources: primitive common ventricle and the bulbous cordis. The primitive common ventricle form most of all this rough part, most of the left ventricle, and the inlet part of the right ventricle. The bulbous cords form the main part of the right ventricle, which is called trabeculated part, which contain trabecular carni, all this rough area, from absorption of the proximal part of the bulbous cords. The smooth outlet part of both ventricles, right ventricle and the left ventricle, comes from the mid portion of the bulbous cordis, which is called the conus cordis. Congenital anomalies of right ventricle mainly presence of this defect. Defect in the interventricular septum called ventricular septal defect. The ventricular septal defect may occur in the membranous part, or in the muscular part, or complete absence of the interventricular septum. This is the development of the ventricle and its congenital anomaly. Thank you for good listening and good luck.